In 1919, the United States created the Cipher Bureau, also known as the Black Chamber, the first peacetime national-level intelligence agency in U.S. history. It was funded through the State Department. Herbert Yardley was the head of the Cipher Bureau. Concerned about large-scale shipbuilding programs in Japan following World War I, President Warren Harding organized the Washington Naval Conference in 1921. He wanted to establish limits on the number and tonnage of warships of each nation because he was concerned about Japanese military expansion in the Pacific. Yardley's Black Chamber team was able to decipher the messages from the Japanese diplomatic delegation to the Naval Conference. Naturally, knowing the lowest naval ratio the Japanese were willing to accept put the U.S. in a powerful negotiating position. With this information, the American delegation was able to negotiate a much smaller ratio than initially asked for. Japan was held to 18 battleships, while the U.S. and Great Britain were permitted 30. Code breaking was clearly in the interest of the United States. However, in 1929, Secretary of State Henry Stimson shut down the Black Chamber for two reasons. First, it was peacetime, and so there was less to intercept, and secondly, Stimson felt that intercepting diplomatic communications was not ethical. "Gentlemen do not read each other's mail," he wrote in his memoirs. Though the State Department felt that deciphering enemy messages was not important, the Army felt differently and created the Signals Intelligence Service, or SIS, in 1930, knowing already that Germany, Japan, and the USSR were potential enemies of the United States. However, with the Black Chamber closing, Yardley was out of a job and with the Great Depression found himself in need of money. He wrote in an article about the Black Chamber, which was published in the Saturday Evening Post in 1931 and was followed by a book. He outlined how the Black Chamber had broken the Japanese code during the Washington Naval Conference. Embarrassed by this information, the Japanese sought to improve the security of their signals. The solution to their security problem was a radical one. They decided to abandon using code and to begin to encipher their most confidential and secret messages. Japanese Baron Hiroshi Oshima purchased an Enigma machine from the Germans, and the Japanese improved the device. The U.S. named that first Japanese code Red because of the folders in which the information was stored by the United States. The Japanese used these red codes from 1931 through 1936. By 1936, the SIS had broken the code. Unfortunately, the Japanese became suspicious that the U.S. was reading their enciphered messages and started working on a different code.
In 1938, the Japanese diplomatic corps received a new cipher machine. They called it Secret Typewriter B. We called it Purple, and we attacked it, and within a short time built our first purple analog. Sight unseen, never seen a purple machine, sheer analysis, built a machine that after the war we realized was a 100% duplicate of that machine. Not the way it looked, but the way it worked.
The purple machine used an electrical rotor system with a 25-character alphabetic switchboard. Purple was an advancement over the German machine, Enigma, because it had more levels of complexity, including daily keys, making it more difficult to decipher. Then, in 1939, war broke out in Europe. Hitler's Nazi forces rolled into Poland and the Polish army was defeated within weeks. In the United States, the SIS hired William Friedman to work on breaking the purple cipher. His team was able to break a substantial chunk of the code. Eventually, the purple machine's method of encryption was completely discovered. While this was a small victory, it did not mean that the messages could be broken because the daily keys being used were still a mystery to the code breakers. Eventually, with perseverance, the cryptanalysts discovered the patterns being used by the Japanese and cracked the code in 1940. The Japanese communications were now exposed. By then, Germany, Japan, and Italy had formed the Axis powers. Poland had been defeated, France had collapsed, and Britain was under siege. Japan had invaded and occupied Manchuria, Korea, Northeast China, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. War had broken across the globe, and the United States would soon be pulled in.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
By declaring war on the Japanese, the United States was also at war with Germany and Italy, Japan's allies. Though the purple cipher had been broken, the information gained was not being fully utilized. The American effort to use the intelligence gained from the Japanese codes was hampered in several ways. First, there were bureaucratic turf wars. The Army and Navy saw the value of combining their efforts, but could not agree on who would be in charge. Efforts were also hampered because of the need for secrecy in order to not make the Japanese suspicious that their codes had been broken. Only a few people in the U.S. saw the information, and these were not the people who could operationalize that information. Henry Stimson, now the Secretary of War and who had changed his mind about the importance of the intelligence gathering, asked Colonel Alfred McCormick to come make sense of the information derived from the code breaking. By this time, the information derived from the decryption and analysis of the purple cipher was referred to as magic. McCormick began to produce daily summaries of what was learned from the codes. Now the information could be used to its fullest potential, helping the Allies triumph over the Axis powers. This was critical to the war effort because in 1941, the U.S. Army was no larger than the armies of Greece and Belgium. The Pacific battleship fleet was on the bottom at Pearl Harbor. The U.S. was outgunned and outmanned. Knowing the enemy's strategic and tactical intentions so that deployment of the troops could be carefully managed would give the Allies the vital edge and help them triumph over the Axis. The information gleaned from magic helped the United States both in the Pacific and in Europe. The Japanese diplomats were zealous in their communications about Hitler's intentions, the planning of Hitler's top military officers, the German attack plans, the daily status of Germany's economy and her military and strategic reserves. This included German plans for defending against an Allied invasion of Europe. They also revealed information about German espionage in England, the Vatican, the United States, and South America. These diplomats were very forthcoming in the information they sent, and the United States read everything they wrote within 24 to 48 hours. The intelligence gained by these communications changed the way the war was fought on all fronts. William Friedman, head of the SIS, said our commanders were able, during the course of the war, to place small forces in action in the right places and at the right times. General Chamberlain, General MacArthur's operations officer, noted, "It saved us many thousands of lives. It shortened the war by 2 years." Magic revealed information that led to the Allied victory in Midway, changing the course of the war in the Pacific. In 1942, General Montgomery, with the information sent by magic, achieved his first victory in Africa, changing the course of the war in both Africa and Europe. Additionally, when the Germans marched west towards Stalingrad, Japanese diplomatic reports were used to let Stalin know where the Russian soldiers would most likely be able to break through, crippling the German army, further hastening the demise of the Axis. In July and August of 1942, Baron Hiroshi Oshima toured the Russian front. The United States knew the status of the German army in Russia. In 1944, he shared information about the Atlantic Wall fortifications against invasion along the coast of France and Belgium, which helped the U.S. prepare for eventual invasion on D-Day. Oshima was described by General George Marshall as our main basis of information regarding Hitler's intentions in Europe. The United States was also privy to which Allied codes had been broken, allowing changes to be made to keep key information from the enemy. In 1943, when landing troops in France appeared impossible, magic helped the military planners to begin their preparation to invade France, destroy German armies, and capture Berlin, triumphing over the Axis powers. The triumph continued after the war, as the reading of the continued Japanese communications gave MacArthur an incredible advantage in the early days of governing Japan. In the years leading up to World War II, the Japanese Purple Code was one of the most complex and well-developed cryptographic methods of its time. Broken by U.S. cryptanalysts in 1940, the communications revealed vital information to the Allies, helping with military strategy, shortening the duration of the war, and leading to victory. The triumph of the breaking of the Purple Code lessened the tragedy of human loss and suffering in World War II.